I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon to introduce an address by the head of state.
Thank you. السيد الرئيس.
Mr. President, President of the General Assembly, Ms. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce a pre-recorded statement by the President of the Lebanese Republic, His Excellency Michel Aoun, at the general debate of the 76th session of the General Assembly. Thank you.
معالي السيد عبد الله شاهد.
His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by congratulating you, Mr. President, on assuming the presidency of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, and wish you the best in your role, which you assume as the world seeks to recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It would have been my pleasure to congratulate you in person had it not been for the global health situation which made it necessary for me to join you today through a pre-recorded video. I would also like to thank His Excellency Volkan Bozkır for his able leadership of last year's session. My congratulations also go to His Excellency Antonio Guterres for his re-election to the helm of the United Nations. I thank him for his efforts in support of Lebanon and for helping organize 3 conferences to support the Lebanese people in the aftermath of the catastrophic explosion at Beirut port. I express my appreciation to all heads of state and government who took part in those conferences, and to governmental and non-governmental organizations and others that offered to help. My gratitude specifically goes to France, whose president rushed to Lebanon to stand with us in the midst of this tragedy. Finally, I thank our friends and allies who assisted our armed forces. Our army is entrusted with the heavy task of fighting terrorism and cooperates with UNIFIL to maintain peace and stability along our southern borders in implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. Ladies and gentlemen, 20 years ago, just a few miles from the UN headquarters, one of the largest terrorist attacks hit the heart of New York City, causing thousands of deaths and injuries, and leaving deep wounds in our collective psyche. The impact of that attack echoed throughout the world and set in motion a global war on terror. The war had a mixed track record, and at every turn, many nations, especially in our region, paid a heavy price for that war, which resulted in death, destruction, and displacement. Today, those same nations are trying to recover and bounce back, just like New York did. Because in the face of terrorism, the will to live will always prevail. This is the exact meaning of this debate's theme, building resilience through hope. Distinguished guests, a new Lebanese government has been formed in line with the Constitution, following more than a year of political turmoil. With this, Lebanon enters a new phase, one we hope will lead us to recovery. The new government will undoubtedly have to confront major domestic and external challenges if it is to gain the trust of its people and the world, after winning the confidence of the Parliament. The past 2 years have been some of the most challenging in Lebanon's history. A chain explosion of protracted and emerging crises affected all sectors. A decades-long rentier-style financial and economic policy, coupled with corruption and waste, and driven by financial mismanagement and lack of accountability, led Lebanon into an unprecedented financial and monetary crisis. The result was economic contraction, inhumane living conditions, and rising levels of unemployment, migration, and poverty. The government has declared its commitment to implement urgently needed financial and economic reforms, to combat corruption, and adopt a financial recovery plan as part of the negotiations with the IMF. This would be coupled with efforts to create a public social safety net and reform and, if necessary, restructure the banking sector and ensure the full implementation of the electricity sector plan. As a first step, the government has completed all the required procedures and launched a forensic audit of the Central Bank of Lebanon. This audit will cover all public accounts. With this, I will have fulfilled my commitment to the Lebanese people and the international community to uphold transparency and accountability. We now look to the international community to finance some of the most vital public and private sector projects necessary to revive the economy and create jobs. We also seek the international community's assistance to recover smuggled funds and the proceeds of corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, our problems have been further compounded by wars in the region, especially the war in Syria, which has had a spillover effect on Lebanon. The blockade on Syria isolated Lebanon, and the conflict there fueled terrorism in our country. Large waves of Syrians have swept Lebanon, with numbers exceeding 1.5 million people to date. I have raised this issue in all forums, especially here at the United Nations, drawing attention to its disastrous socio-economic, health, and security consequences. I have repeatedly urged the international community to help us ensure a safe return for Syrians, but my appeals fell on deaf ears. Instead of aid deliveries inside Syria, aid has continued to be channeled to Syrians in their host communities in Lebanon, encouraging them to remain where they are. Today, as Lebanon is fighting for its survival, I repeat my appeal. The international community must help Lebanon manage this crushing displacement crisis. But it must first and foremost ensure the safe return of displaced Syrians to their country. We have put forward a comprehensive repatriation plan, and we reject all proposals of integrating Syrians in Lebanon. We are equally opposed to any attempts at settling Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. This is consistent with all international resolutions on the Palestinian question, which set out the parameters of the solution, including the right to return. We remain gravely concerned at Israel's repeated threats against Lebanon, and more recently, Israel's plans to carry out oil and gas exploration activities along the contested maritime border. We condemn any and all attempts to violate the limits of our exclusive economic zone, and we maintain our right to the oil and gas found within that zone. In fact, the bidding process for offshore drilling started months ago, but later stopped due to pressure from well-known sources. Lebanon demands the resumption of indirect negotiations on the demarcation of the southern maritime borders, in line with international law. We will not relinquish nor compromise on our border claims, and it is the role of the international community to stand with us. Distinguished guests, the COVID-19 pandemic wreaked havoc on our world, ravaging the economy and the health and education sectors. The impact of the pandemic was particularly felt in Lebanon, where COVID-19 exacerbated an already dire situation. Health officials in Lebanon and relevant authorities responded professionally and proactively, managing to keep the numbers of cases under control. However, the pandemic took a heavy toll on the fragile economy and the healthcare sector, given the severe shortages of medicine, medical supplies, and fuel, and the lack of doctors and nurses, many of whom have migrated for economic reasons. On vaccines, Lebanon has been one of the first countries to roll out a vaccination campaign, achieving a 30% vaccination rate to date, with the aim of reaching 40% by the end of this year. In the midst of this perfect storm, the Beirut port explosion was the last straw. 1 year on, the lights have yet to come back on in our afflicted capital. Our only wish is for Beirut's heart to beat again, and for the port to be what it once was, a hub for trade. We thank all those who've provided help. Reconstruction and development assistance is now a priority. We welcome all international efforts to rehabilitate the port according to applicable laws until it is fully operational. We cherish the international solidarity shown to our capital and our people, which has indeed helped heal some of the wounds. However, we may also require assistance investigating the incident and seeking justice. The families of the victims and the injured will not have closure until justice is achieved. The Lebanese judiciary is currently looking to determine the causes and circumstances of the explosion and related administrative liabilities, and has already issued indictments and made arrests. We expect the currently confidential investigation to shed light on the origin of the explosive material, how they entered the port, and the people behind that. And we will also examine satellite images for any suspicious movements at the time of the explosion. we request once again those countries that have relevant information to share them with the investigation as required. Ladies and gentlemen, the troubles of the past 2 years in Lebanon and the world have delayed the establishment of the Academy for Human Encounters and Dialogue, an initiative I announced at the United Nations in 2017, which was later endorsed by the General Assembly in 2019 in its Resolution 73/344. Recent events and escalating regional conflicts only reaffirm the importance of such an initiative and the importance of its goal of promoting human and cultural interaction. A large piece of land near Beirut has been designated as a future location for the Academy, and pre-construction surveys have already begun. I call on all our friends to join their fellow countries that have expressed their interest in signing the agreement establishing the Academy. Distinguished guests, the theme, Building Resilience Through Hope, is not a mere slogan for the Lebanese people. It is, in fact, a daily reality. Resilience is our way of life. We never relent. We never surrender. Despite all the difficulties, the crises, and the tragedies, our people continue to fight for a better future. As Lebanon tries to claw its way back to recovery, we count on the whole world to support us in achieving our goals. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Lebanese Republic for the statement just made.